بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أفضل المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Dr. Abdaiz, thank you very much for your invitation. Your Excellency Zayani, thank you for being with us on the panel, and distinguished guests also. It's quite a privilege to be sitting among you, as it is to be addressing you, such a distinguished audience. It's nice to be back in Cambridge. I have a brother who graduated from Cambridge, so there is a family link to the city. And I would like to congratulate those present here, those of them who are attending the university, but also just for being in the city of Cambridge. Dr. Suleiman invited, I think, a comment, if not directly, then indirectly, on what to call what is happening in the Arab world today. He mentioned several descriptions and names. I have not reached a conclusion, but I will hopefully say that we don't call it in coming years the bloodbath in the Arab world, because certainly it has aspects of that, in my view, more than it has of spring flowers or new growth. From the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, looking at the events that have happened in the Arab world, I'm reminded of previous such tsunamis as the events have been described in the Arab world these days. The first, of course, was the military coup d'etats that followed the Second World War and the establishment of the State of Israel and Palestine. And those spread from Egypt to other countries, first Syria, of course, then Egypt, then Iraq, etc. And the second wave that we went through was the wave of so-called Arab socialism. All of us remember those days, with countries espousing that doctrine as a means of trying to either uplift their capabilities, both human and economic, or to face the challenges of meeting outside threats, either from Israel or from the West or the East. Within those waves and tsunamis and various events that took place in the area, the kingdom remained a calm and developing country, with ambitions fairly established to raise the livelihood of the people, but also to maintain a stability and security of the people, so that that livelihood can be guaranteed and not threatened by bloodbaths or by other such events. Those of you who don't know the history of Saudi Arabia will not know that for hundreds of years the Arabian Peninsula was a sea of conflict and poverty and disease. So for us to have been able to achieve a certain level of stability is a prize not to be forsaken lightly, nor to be threatened by emotion or by ambition, over-ambition. And so the story of the kingdom vis-à-vis what is happening in the Arab world is that, first of all, as the Secretary General of the GCC has already mentioned, the issue of non-interference in the affairs of others is a principal policy of the kingdom, and it follows it very strictly. Yesterday there was a press conference between our foreign minister and the British foreign minister who was visiting Saudi Arabia today, and our foreign minister reiterated that principle quite clearly. However, reiterating a principle of non-interference does not allow us as human beings, before we are Muslims and Arabs, not to be sad and cry out for the loss of life that is taking place in certain parts of the Arab world, and to hope that the peoples of those countries where that loss of life is taking place will be able to achieve stability and security again, as has happened in Bahrain. And I take this opportunity to congratulate us in the rest of the Arab world for hopefully what is going to be a successful overcoming of the challenges that have faced Bahrain, and to lament the loss of life that took place in Bahrain before this event of coming together is taking place. Definitely the people of Bahrain deserve all the applause that they can get. Another aspect of the so-called, and I say so-called because, as I said, I have not reached a definitive name for it, Arab Spring, is that it has shown differences in values between the kingdom and other countries, mostly in the West. When events in Tunis took place and the president of Tunis was thrown out and his plane was seeking refuge in a country where leaders of those countries had feted and hosted that same Tunisian leader many times over and used the most sublime, if not more than that, descriptions for him, refused entry to his plane for him and his family. The kingdom, as the custodian of the two holy mosques, where all Muslims have a right to come at any time, opened its gates for him to reach there. There is no intent or purpose in indicating whether that allowance for President Ben Ali to come to the kingdom to be either construed as support for him or as denigration for what happened in Tunis. But nonetheless, as a country of refuge throughout its history for thousands of years, when pilgrims from all over the world have sought refuge in the holy temples of Saudi Arabia, he and his family were welcome to come there. And when events in Egypt took place, again, King Abdullah unhesitatingly and publicly hoped for a calmer and more unnecessarily obtrusive removal of President Mubarak, and called on world leaders like Mr. Obama and Mr. Sarkozy and Prime Minister Cameron in the United Kingdom not to voice their hasty calls for Mr. Mubarak to leave his post. Not because he has any specific love for President Mubarak or that he has any specific objection to the wishes of the Egyptian people, but when people began to call for his removal from the outside, first of all, it contravened the principle of non-interference in the affairs of other states, and secondly, the people of Egypt had not yet expressed their wish. And having worked with President Mubarak for 30 years closely on the most important issues that affect the Arab and Muslim world, from Palestine to Iraq to the liberation of Kuwait to Yemen, etc., etc., it was not for King Abdullah simply to say, "Go, Mr. Mubarak." It was for the Egyptian people to do that. And when they did that, there was no hesitation for King Abdullah to offer his friendship and to extend his hand of support to the Egyptian people, and to send his foreign minister more than 3 times to Egypt to talk with the Egyptian leaders, the new ones, about how best Saudi Arabia can support Egypt. And you've seen all the reports of the economic aid package that the kingdom offered to Egypt without any strings attached, by the way. Unlike the offer that was made by the IMF or by President Obama. You remember his conditions for giving aid to Arab countries. They have to adopt democracy, etc., etc., etc. All these reflect differences in values. Naturally, for me as a Saudi, I'm inclined to support the Saudi view of these values. I hope you don't mind my saying that. But nonetheless, I think there is room for all of us here to learn from what has happened in the Arab world. And I will close by another difference, if you like, in definitions and not necessarily in values. When Western politicians have promised their own people more money, more benefits, a better life, they call it politics. But they hardly deliver on their promises. Look at the mess that the West is in right now. Our leaders have promised and delivered our people a better life and a higher standard of living, the removal of disease and hopefully, eventually, in the near future, poverty, without any undue false hubris about our accomplishments. Because we know that there are still some things that we have to deliver to our people, and that we're still in the beginning of our road to that development. But Western pundits and politicians call our leaders' delivered promises handouts and bribes. And that is a reflection of the difference between what we do and what others say that we do. Thank you very much, ladies.